চঞ্চল স্যার, আপনি শুরু করতে পারেন স্যার। আমাদের প্রোগ্রামটা ফেসবুকে লাইভ শুরু হয়ে গিয়েছে স্যার। আনমিউট করে স্যার আপনি প্রোগ্রামটা শুরু করতে পারেন স্যার। স্যার একটু আনমিউট করে নিতে হবে আপনাকে স্যার। স্যার শোনা যাচ্ছে না স্যার, আনমিউট হয়নি স্যার এখনো।
Hello.
স্যার এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে, এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার। জি স্যার, থ্যাংক ইউ।
Respected chairperson sir and the respected audience, I welcome you all to our today's scientific webinar. At the very beginning, I like to express my heartfelt condolence to the eternal peace of the brave. Today we have two panel of experts, Professor Dewan Saifuddin Ahmed sir and Professor Dr. Masud Rahman Khan. And we have two learned speakers, Dr. Rajibul Alam, Associate Professor, and Dr. A.S.M. Hassan Ali, HSB resident. And today we have chosen two important topics for presentation. First one is medical audit, and though it is a new topics to most of us, it will be palatable within few minutes by our very learned and expert speaker, Dr. Rajiv. And I like to express my thanks to such a great topic, and it is a very demanding topic for the present situation. Though it is adopted in 1993 in NSAs, it is still not adopted in many countries, and I think that it is the high time to adopt in our settings medical audit or clinical audit in our clinical practice. So, and the second topic is Helicobacter pylori related peptic ulcer disease, and one of my best students, Dr. S.M. Ali Hassan, resident FSB, will discuss this topic. And initially, I like to invite Dr. Rajibul Alam, who is an expert and popular teacher in Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujibur University Gastroenterology Department, to deliver his speech. Dr. Rajiv, please.
রাজীব স্যার,
অডিবল, ক্লিয়ারলি অডিবল শোনা যাচ্ছে?
স্যার ক্লিয়ারলি অডিবল এবং আপনার প্রেজেন্টেশনটা স্যার দেখা যাচ্ছে।
Thank you, Dr. Chanchal Kumar Ghosh, for inviting me for starting the discussion. Honorable Chairman, distinguished panel of experts, and learned audience. Assalamu alaikum and very good morning. I welcome you all to a brief discussion on a very important aspect of clinical governance, the medical audit. Medical and clinical audit is a much needed but least talked topic in our country. On the contrary, elsewhere in the world, especially in the developed countries, medical and clinical audit is an integral part of routine activities in every hospital. In hospital practice, we have to encounter patients at different points, from the admission up to the discharge, and also in follow-ups. And we do try our best to manage the patient and to document what we have done. Unfortunately, often we fail to meet the standards. Medical or clinical audit is the means to fulfill our urge to do the best. So, we must raise some questions to ourselves. Have the patient history and examination been properly recorded following the admission? Were appropriate investigations carried out? Was the treatment appropriate and timely? Was the outcome satisfactory? Is the content of discharge summary adequate? Were the patients and attendants satisfied? Does our overall activity meet the national and international standards? Medical or clinical audit is the answer to the questions and maybe the solution if there is a problem. So what is clinical audit or medical audit? Clinical audit is a specific activity of quality improvement cycle. That measures clinical care against agreed and proven standards, that is audit criteria, by evaluation of data, documents and resources to check that performance of a system meets the specific standards. In simple words, are we doing the right thing in the right way? How far our actual practice is away from the best practice? Medical audit and clinical audit, the terms are similar and interchangeable. Review of the clinical care of patients provided by the medical staffs only is medical audit, whereas when it is done by medical and paramedical staffs, that is called clinical audit. Since 1993 or 1994, the term clinical audit is more acceptable and have largely replaced the earlier term medical audit. Recollecting some old memories, history of clinical audit dates back to ancient period. King Hammurabi of Babylon in 1750 BC, before Christ, used to audit physicians, especially if they could not cure the patient. There happened to be financial penalty. Physicians sometimes lost their lives in the process of so-called audit. At the beginning of modern era, the lady with the lamp, Florence Nightingale, set an example of clinical audit during the Crimean War in Austria. She identified that high mortality of wounded soldiers were due to infections from poor hygiene. She simply improved hygienic condition and the mortality rate got down from 40% to 2%. Ernest Codman is considered to be the first true medical auditor. He introduced the end result idea, that is to follow up every patient's case history after surgery by the individual surgeons. There might have some confusions between audit and research, as both involve answering specific questions. Both are led by professionals with careful data collecting design, and both can be done retrospectively and prospectively. But audit is not research. Audit never involve experiments. There happens to be hypothesis. There happens to be no hypothesis in audit. Audit never involves completely new treatment, and there is little disturbance of patients during audit process. Audit usually deals with small number of patients within a short span of time. There is no extensive statistical analysis. And more importantly, unlike research, ethical approval is not required in an audit process. Clinical audit can be done anywhere healthcare is provided. In our private chambers, in local hospitals, in tertiary care hospitals. Clinical audit is also carried out in different countries nationwide for the bigger national healthcare interests. Any type of activity relating to clinical care can be audited, especially if there is scope of improvement. It may be history taking, it may be history writing, it may be discharge paper writing. Any interventions, including endoscopy, colonoscopy, ERCP, and others, can be audited. On the other hand, knowledge, attitudes, and skills of clinical staffs may be audited. Patient satisfaction and cost effectiveness. These are also within the reach of clinical audit. What is the benefit? Clinical audit can measure our current practice against set standards, so it can help to provide efficient and better delivery of care. Evidence-based clinical practice by means of audit can reveal areas of improvements. Overall, clinical audit can ensure an efficient use of resources. What are the steps? Selecting a topic with standard is key for starting an audit process, which is followed by data collection, data analysis, and formulation of results. And this can lead to possible changes in the system. After allowing time for changes, re-audit is crucial to assess the improvement. If we summarize the steps in broad heading: preparation and planning for audit, measuring the performance, implementing the changes, and sustaining the improvements. These are the main stages of audit. Preparation and planning is the first stage. Stakeholders, including the patients, should be involved in the audit process during planning. Performance can be measured through data collection, data analysis, preparation, and presentation of results. A quality improvement plan should be formulated and implemented. Re-audit is required to close the loop for sustaining the improvements. Audit team. Audit team comprises of audit lead, clinical audit lead or supervisor, the clinical audit manager, clinical audit facilitator, and team members. The team may be unidisciplinary and multidisciplinary. Healthcare users should be involved in any way with the audit process. Selecting the topic and setting the standards. These are two important, most important part of an audit cycle or audit process. Topic selection should be done very carefully. Topic should be related to the patients and should have the potential to improve patients' outcome. Technically and financially important issues are lucrative. Local and national importance should be kept in mind. Most importantly, it should be practically viable. Aims and objective of an audit process can be expressed by the mnemonic SMART, that stands for specific, measurable, agreed by all, relevant with the current situation, and must be theoretically sound. National and international guidelines could be set as standards to select the audit criteria. If not available, literature review and findings from evidence-based practice may also be set as standards. What should be the sample size? Roughly 20 to 50 samples may be sufficient, especially in process-based audits where activities, thoughts, informations, these things are audited. Whereas scientific approach is available to calculate the sample size also. Calculation of results can be done by using this simple formula to measure the compliance and formulation of results. In last few minutes, I tried to discuss some introductory theoretical aspects of clinical audit. Now I want to cite some practical example how we can introduce clinical audit in our setting. As you can see, this is a sample pro forma for case note audit in our tertiary care hospital. That includes project title, that is case note audit, specialty gastroenterology obviously, professor head of the department, project lead, staff members. Name of all of them should be included in this pro forma, including the presentation date. Meticulous record keeping is an integral part of patient care. This is the rationale, and the objectives are to assess the quality of patient's hospital record, to seek incremental improvement. The case note should contain the relevant demographic and clinical details of the patient, follow-up, management plan, referral notes, everything. Ten random case notes is considered a sample size for this pro forma. Name of the doctor associated with data collection and analysis should be noted here. Four standards have been set for this case note audit. 1A, is there a handwritten record? 1B, is the clinician identified? Number 2, is patient identified on each page, including name, number, age, disease? Is there a clear diagnosis or clinical problem? Is there a clear management plan? Assuming that based on the standards, in this example, all the case notes are well documented, we assume that the results or recommendations may be like this or as follows. All the case notes had handwritten, legible record of the patients with clear diagnosis and management plan. And also another recommendation is to continue with maintaining good patient record. Re-audit should be done in 6 months. Here is another practical example of clinical audit, which is exclusively related to gastroenterology. This original article was published in Portuguese Journal of Gastroenterology and described that how a simple audit intervention can improve the quality of report in upper GI endoscopy. The study aimed to evaluate the quality of upper GI endoscopy reports in a tertiary center and to assess the effect of simple audit intervention, that means re-audit, on improving the quality of report. Initially, 1,000 consecutive upper GI endoscopy reports were audited. Thereafter, 250 upper GI endoscopy reports during the re-audit to see the improvement of the reports. This original article was here you can see the performance measures. These performance measures did not evaluate the quality of upper GI endoscopy. Rather, it evaluated whether upper GI endoscopy report contained all necessary informations like indication, use of chromoendoscopy, completeness of endoscopy. If not complete, why it was not complete? Segment description of all segments of the upper GI tract. Operated stomach, if any, should have been clearly described. Adequate photo documentation. Clarity on the number of biopsy containers. Correct lesion description. Clear final conclusion. Follow-up recommendation. Elaboration of abbreviations. And overall comprehensibility of the report. Based on these performance measures, in the initial audit, approximately 52% of the incomplete endoscopies did not have any reason or did not present any justification for its incompleteness. 88% of the lesions were correctly described, and overall 64% of the reports were considered as being of high quality. After the audit, the rate of unjustified incomplete endoscopies decreased significantly to 28% from 51%. Current lesion description improved to 95%, 96% from 88% before the intervention. Follow-up recommendations were found in 80% reports, in comparison to 53% prior to the audit. Correct segment description also improved to 96% from 92%. So it clearly shows audit can improve our usual practice. So before I conclude the discussion, I want to show the audit cycle and recapitulate the audit cycle again. Involve the team and plan the audit. Agree the standards to set the criteria. Observe the practice and collect the data. Formulate the result. Compare the performance against the standards. Present the findings and agree with the action plan. Implement the action plan. Take some time, re-audit to see whether the improvements have been met. Respected Chairperson, distinguished panel of experts, and dear audience, I want to remind you that this discussion is mere an introduction and starting. We have to discuss further and practically introduce audit in our own setting. Then the things will go on. Thank you all for your patient hearing.
Thank you so much. Hello. Thank you so much, Dr. Rajibul Alam. You have explained the medical audit very nicely, but you have told that it is the tip of the iceberg. So in future we will discuss elaborately in this topic, I hope. And from your discussion, we all know that clinical audit is very essential. Outcome of our procedures, and the respected audience, if you have any queries in this topic, you can ask at the end of our session. That is, there will be a question and answer session about 10 minutes at the end of the presentation of the second speaker. And now I like to invite our second speaker, Dr. S.M. Ali Hassan, who is also a very good presenter and one of my best students, Dr. Ali Hassan. I like to tell it proudly, in proud. Dr. Ali Hassan will tell H. pylori related peptic ulcer disease. We all know that H. pylori is the first one criminal of the to be the cause of peptic ulcer both in stomach and duodenum, and it is highly prevalent in the developing countries like us. So I like to invite Dr. S.M. Ali Hassan to present his topic in very short. Dr. Ali Hassan, please.
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। স্যার আমাকে শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার?
জি,
থ্যাংক ইউ স্যার। Respected chairperson, respected panel of experts, my dear teachers and audience, assalamu alaikum, and welcome to my segment of the presentation. I am going to present H. pylori associated peptic ulcer disease. As we all know that this is a large topic presented in a short time, so I will try to mainly highlight on the H. pylori. So let's start with the H. pylori. H. pylori, we know that the H. pylori is a small carved micro aerophilic organism, gram negative, and it has multiple flagella in its one end. So it is actively motile, and it produces several enzymes. Out of them, the urease is one of the important enzyme it produces, which causes hydrolysis of the urea to produce ammonia and carbon dioxide. And this reaction is one of the important steps in pathogenesis, and also important. This is basis of several diagnostic tests. And if usually H. pylori infection occurs during childhood and thereafter causes lifelong infection unless treated. Transmission occurs person to person through direct contact, fecal-oral route, oral-oral route, gastro-oral route, and in this case, in this regards, that iatrogenic infection is an important source. Like if by the infected endoscope and other infected endoscopic instruments may be an important source of infection. H. pylori mostly causes asymptomatic chronic infection, but in about 10 to 15% of cases, it causes chronic active gastritis, peptic ulcer disease, gastric adenocarcinoma, malt lymphoma, and it is thought that it may be associated with unexplained iron deficiency anemia or idiothrombocytopenic purpura. H. pylori, it is thought that nearly half of the global population are infected with H. pylori infection, and the prevalence of infection range from 7 to 87% depending on the method of diagnosis and population. And in developed countries, this incidence of infections are now declining. And regarding our perspectives, I am showing some study reports regarding the H. pylori infections. A study done by Nahar et al. Published in 2018 conducted among the randomly selected household from a peri-urban community in Dhaka, which showed that nearly 92.7% were positive for H. pylori positive, and the test was done by fecal antigen test. And those among who are positive fecal antigen test, culture was positive in 59.1%. In another study in 1995, which showed that 92% of our populations are H. pylori prevalent, And this study was done using the ELISA technique, serology. And another study which was done among the children of lower socioeconomic area using the UDI blood test, which showed that 67% prevalent. And after successful eradication of H. pylori, the reinfection rate is nearly 5% per year. Regarding the commonly used drugs for eradications, the resistance, a study done by Aftab et al. Published in 2016, which showed that clarithromycin resistance was 39.3%, metronidazole resistance was 94%, levofloxacin resistance was 66%. And in this study also showed that the levofloxacin resistance was higher among people that living in Dhaka city compared to those coming from the village. Amoxicillin and tetracycline resistance rates were very low. And in that study, it is done in our department in 2008 to 2009, which showed in this study, PPI, amoxicillin, and metronidazole regimen was used for 14 days, and eradication rate was 89%. Those who are metronidazole susceptible, but those who are metronidazole resistant, in that case, eradication rate was 64%. Now the peptic ulcer disease. Peptic ulcer disease, we all know the definition, that it is the localized defect of GI mucosa extending to the at least muscularis mucosa. And during endoscopy, we defined as the mucosal break with considerable depth. Sometimes the arbitrary diameter used in that the 5 millimeter or larger are considered as peptic ulcers. And regarding the etiology, H. pylori and NSAID are the major causes, major cause of peptic ulcer disease. In H. pylori, we know that 90% of duodenal ulcer and up to 80% of gastric ulcer are due to H. pylori. But this scenario is now changed in developed countries, as the incidence of H. pylori infection is decreases in developed countries. So in developed countries, NSAID become the leading cause of gastric ulcer, but for the duodenal ulcer, still H. pylori is the leading cause. Regarding the non-H. pylori and non-NSAID cases, during evaluation, H. pylori and NSAID should still be considered first, as there may be surreptitious use of NSAID or the failure to detect the H. pylori infections. Other causes may be gastrinemia, gastrinoma of Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, enteral G-cell hyperplasia, systemic mastocytosis, basophilia, rebound acid secretion after withdrawal of PPI therapy, and etc. Regarding the H. pylori associated peptic ulcer disease, H. pylori was identified as the major etiological agent for the peptic ulcer disease by the Warren and Marshall, and for their discovery, they have got the Nobel Prize for medicine or physiology in 2005. I'm not going to discuss the details about the pathogenesis, but about only why 10 to 20% of infected patients develop peptic ulcer disease. It is mainly depends on the virulence factors of the organism, host genetic susceptibility, immune response, and also other cofactors. Natural history of H. pylori associated ulcers. In a study in 1988, the natural history was observed of peptic ulcer disease infected with H. pylori without giving the eradication therapy for 12 months. In that study, they found that 26% of patients did not experience further symptoms after documented duodenal ulcer healing, and 33% experienced one recurrence, 24% experienced two recurrence, and 17% experienced 3 or more recurrence. But this recurrence is markedly reduced when H. pylori eradication therapy is given, and this benefit is greatest for the duodenal ulcer. And eradication therapy is very important for preventing recurrent bleeding from peptic ulcer. Now the diagnosis and management algorithm. In patients with peptic ulcer disease, most of the patient presents with uninvestigated dyspepsia initially. So in case of uninvestigated dyspepsia, if there is any indication for endoscopy, then we go for further. We directly go to endoscopy and diagnose the H. pylori using the endoscopic technique. But in case of if there is no indication for endoscopy, like younger age without alarming features, in that case, especially in case of high H. pylori prevalent area, test and treat strategy is the most cost-effective approach. In that case, at first we test the H. pylori, test for H. pylori using the non-invasive method like urea breath test or stool antigen test. Then if found positive, treatment should be given. And regarding the diagnostic technique for H. pylori, we all know about the invasive and non-invasive test. I am just discussing the clinical implication of this test. Regarding the serology, it is now not widely used in clinical practice because it has a low specificity rate. Regarding the urea breath test, it is the first line investigation for test and treat strategy with high sensitivity and specificity rate. And stool antigen test can be alternative to the urea breath test. Regarding the endoscopic test, if there is indication for endoscopy and no contraindication for biopsy, in that case, rapid urase test is the first line investigation, as it allows immediate treatment, but it is not recommended to see the treatment response. And regarding the histology, it provides additional information regarding the pathology of the GI mucosa. And for culture and PCR-assay, these tests are usually required after failure of the eradication therapy, where drug sensitivity needs to be detected for better guidance of the treatment. But these techniques are not widely available and also difficult to do. Now, when false negative results can occur, if patient already on PPI, antibiotic or bismuth therapy, then false negative test report can occur. So in that case, bismuth and antibiotic should be stopped at least 4 weeks before testing, and PPI should be stopped at least 1 to 2 weeks before testing. And test for successful eradication. All individuals treated for H. pylori should be assessed for successful H. pylori eradication according to European guideline, but US guideline said that only patients with peptic ulcer disease, multiple lymphoma, early gastric cancer, and dyspepsia should be confirmed for successful eradications. Now the management in this management algorithm, management have taken from 3 guidelines. The peptic ulcer disease management mainly taken from the Japanese Society of Gastroenterology, and for the H. pylori eradications taken from the American College of Gastroenterology and the Maastricht 5 Florence Consensus Report guideline. Here, for peptic H. pylori associated peptic ulcer disease, H. pylori eradication therapy is the initial treatment. As H. pylori eradication therapy accelerates the gastric or duodenal ulcer healing, and after H. pylori eradication therapy, additional treatment for ulcer healing is recommended. H. pylori eradication is recommended as a preventive care for recurrence of peptic ulcer. After successful eradication therapy, they said that in the Japanese Society of Gastroenterology guideline, the recurrence rate reduced to 0 to 2%. Now the first line regimen, according to the American College of Gastroenterology guideline, the commonly used first-line regimens are clarithromycin-based triple therapy, which consists of PPI, clarithromycin, amoxicillin, and metronidazole for 14 days. But this regimen is only applicable if the clarithromycin resistance rate is low, less than 15%. Another recommended first-line regimen is the bismuth-based quadruple therapy, which consists of PPI, bismuth, tetracycline, metronidazole, and other concomitant therapy and sequential therapy, also known as the clarithromycin-based non-bismuth quadruple therapy. Here, in concomitant therapy, PPI, clarithromycin, amoxicillin, nitromidazoles are used for 10 to 14 days. And in sequential therapy, PPI, amoxicillin are used for 5 to 7 days, and first 5 to 7 days, and then subsequently PPI, clarithromycin, and nitromidazoles are used for another 5 to 7 days. And in hybrid therapy, PPI and amoxicillin are used for 7 days initially, and then PPI, clarithromycin, amoxicillin, and nitroimidazoles are used for another 7 days. Levofloxacin-based triple therapy is also a favored first-line regimen for H. pylori, and here the H. pylori PPI, levofloxacin, and amoxicillin are used for 10 to 14 days in levofloxacin triple therapy, and in levofloxacin quadruple therapy, that is levofloxacin sequential therapy, PPI, amoxicillin are used for first 5 to 7 days, and PPI, amoxicillin, levofloxacin, and nitromidazoles are used for another 5 to 7 days. Now, the cell-based therapy. After failure of the first-line therapy, there are some second-line therapy or cell-based therapy, bismuth quadruple therapy, levofloxacin triple therapy, or concomitant therapy are used as second cell-based therapy. Rifabutin triple therapy, which consists of PPI, rifabutin, and amoxicillin, and it is also used in cell-based therapy. And high-dose dual therapy, where only PPI and high-dose amoxicillin 750 milligram each 4 times daily are used for 14 days as the cell-based therapy. Now, regarding H. pylori eradication therapy, according to the MASTRIS 5 Florence Consensus Report, recommendations are, as I said earlier, that for uninvestigated dyspepsia, a test and treat strategy is cost effective, especially when there is no indication for endoscopy. But in case of low prevalence area, especially after failure of the anti-secretory therapy, endoscopy-based strategy should be used. And urea breath test and fecal antigen test are recommended for non-invasive test for test and test strategy. Regarding if there is indication for endoscopy and no contraindication for biopsy, in this rapid urease test is the first line diagnostic test. And but it allows immediate treatment, but it is not recommended to assess the treatment response. Before choice of antimicrobial regimen, we should consider some factors like previous antibiotic exposure, like macrolide exposure or other antibiotic exposure, local antibiotic resistant pattern, and penicillin allergy. After a first line failure, culture and sensitivity testing is recommended to guide the therapy, except bismuth-based quadruple therapy is used. And to see the treatment response, urea breath test is the first line investigations, and stool antigen test is the alternative. And in where the clarithromycin resistance rate is low, less than 15%, here the clarithromycin-based triple therapy is the first line treatment, but levofloxacin containing quadruple therapy is the alternative treatment. And where the clarithromycin resistance is high, more than 15%, in that area, clarithromycin should not be used as first-line treatment without doing drug culture sensitivity testing. In case of penicillin allergy and low clarithromycin resistance area, here clarithromycin containing triple therapy using the metronidazole can be used. An alternative is the bismuth containing quadruple therapy. When the clarithromycin resistance is high, here the bismuth quadruple therapy or non-bismuth quadruple therapy like concomitant therapy are recommended. And where the areas with dual resistance like clarithromycin and metronidazole resistance, high resistance to clarithromycin and metronidazole, in that area bismuth quadruple therapy is the first line treatment recommendation. And treatment duration for bismuth and non-bismuth quadruple therapy should be extended to 14 days unless 10 days therapies are proven effective locally. After failure of the clarithromycin-based triple therapy, a bismuth quadruple therapy or a fluoroquinolone containing triple or quadruple therapy are recommended as the second-line treatment. After failure of the bismuth containing quadruple therapy, fluoroquinolone containing triple or quadruple therapy may be recommended. And after failure of non-bismuth quadruple therapy, either a bismuth quadruple therapy or a fluoroquinolone containing triple therapy are recommended. And after failure of the second line treatment, culture and susceptibility testing and molecular determination of the genotype resistance is recommended in order to guide the treatment. And after failure of first line treatment with triple clarithromycin triple or non-bismuth quadruple therapy and second line treatment failure with fluoroquinolone containing therapy, bismuth based quadruple therapy is recommended. After failure of the first treatment with bismuth quadruple therapy and second treatment failure, second line failure with fluoroquinolone containing therapy, in that case clarithromycin based triple therapy or quadruple therapy is recommended. In alternatively, bismuth in combination with other antibiotics may be given. In cases of high clarithromycin quinolone resistant area, where bismuth can be added with other antibiotics or rifabutin triple therapy may be an option. Now, in summary, all active infection with H. pylori, we should offer eradication therapy. And we, before eradication choice of antibiotic regimen, we should whether any query about that, whether any exposure to macrolide previously and resistance, clarithromycin resistance rate, high or low, and eradication rate using the clarithromycin triple therapy, whether it is less than or more than 85%. If there is previous macrolide exposure or high clarithromycin resistance area or low eradication area, in that case, bismuth quadruple therapy is the recommended first line treatment. But otherwise, clarithromycin triple therapy is the first line treatment. And in that case, whether patient have penicillin allergy or not, if patient have penicillin allergy, in that case, clarithromycin triple therapy using the metronidazole can be used. But if patient having a history of metronidazole use within past few years, in that case, then this should be avoided. And in that case, bismuth quadruple therapy is the recommended first line treatment. Now, the second line treatment antibiotic regimen here, if after failure, if clarithromycin based triple therapy failed initially, and then the bismuth based quadruple therapy is recommended as second line therapy. But patient, if if patient having no penicillin allergy, in that case, multiple options are present like levofloxacin triple therapy, bismuth quadruple therapy, or high dose dual therapy. On the other hand, if the bismuth quadruple therapy used initially and it failed, in that case, there are options like levofloxacin triple therapy, bismuth quadruple therapy with increasing the dose of PPI, and also clarithromycin-based triple therapy or quadruple therapy. After second line treatment, eradication confirmation of eradication is required, and after after failure of the second line, culture and sensitivity testing should be done. And if culture sensitivity testing is not available, in that case, rifabutin therapy can be used, or other alternative cell-based therapy can be used. Now, the non-eradication therapy for peptic ulcer disease, PPI is recommended as first-line drug as non-eradication therapy. And if PPI cannot be given, in that case, H2 receptor blocker are recommended, and sucralfate, misoprostol having equally effective to H2 receptor antagonist. And there are some indications for maintenance therapy, like in complicated peptic ulcer disease, or patient having giant ulcer with old age or multiple comorbidities, failure to eradicate H. pylori infection, or continued NSAID use, frequently recurrent ulcer. That means more than 2 ulcer recur per year, and non-H. pylori, non-NSAID ulcer. In that case, non-eradication maintenance therapy is indicated. And for in non-eradication therapy for peptic ulcer, maintenance therapy is effective for preventing ulcer recurrence. Endoscopic therapy in uncomplicated peptic ulcer, usually endoscopy therapy is not required. It is indicated for bleeding peptic ulcer disease, for initial hemostasis, and also for rebleeding episodes. It reduces the need for surgery and mortality. There are two important indications for endoscopic therapy, like active bleeding and non-bleeding visible vessel. Second look endoscopy is recommended in high-risk patients, like patients with hemodynamic instability and multiple comorbidities. During endoscopy, active bleeding, large ulcer size, posterior duodenal ulcer, and laser gastric curvature ulcer. And after endoscopic therapy, antacid agent is strongly recommended. And if patient found H. pylori positive, H. pylori eradication therapy is strongly recommended. Endoscopic balloon dilatations. It is an alternative to surgery for stenosis due to chronic peptic ulcer disease. And surgical treatment. Over recent decades, the development of potent anti-ulcerant drug and discovery of H. pylori have essentially eliminated the need for elective surgery. Surgery are now indicated only after peptic ulcer complication, like ulcer perforation, bleeding which cannot be controlled with endoscopy, and stenosis caused by chronic peptic ulcer, and sometimes non-ulcer not responding to medical therapy can be an indication for surgical treatment. And after surgery, if patient is H. pylori positive, eradication therapy is recommended. Now, in flow chart, the summary of the H. pylori management, peptic ulcer management. If patient present with complication like perforation, stenosis, surgery is recommended. Sometimes for small leaking perforation, conservative therapy can be effective. And for bleeding peptic ulcer disease, endoscopic hemostasis is recommended along with the pharmacological therapy. But if it failed, that two options, surgery or interventional radiological approach. And if interventional radiology failed, then surgery is recommended. And in non-complication, if there is no complication, direct medical therapy. Regarding the H. pylori positive peptic ulcer disease, first line eradication therapy And after failure of first line eradication therapy, second line eradication therapy is recommended. This is taken from the Japanese Society of Gastroenterology, and they usually not recommend the third line approach, as third line treatment, their eradication rate is below the acceptable level, so they do not recommend the third line approach. And if there is failed to eradicate the H. pylori or other indication to give the maintenance therapy, then maintenance therapy should be given. So that's all. Thank you all.
স্যার একটু আনমিউট করে কথা বলতে হবে স্যার, চঞ্চল স্যারকে রিকোয়েস্ট করছি আনমিউট করে। স্যার আনমিউট হয়নি এখনো স্যার, আনমিউট এখনো হয়নি স্যার। আমি স্যার আনমিউট রিকোয়েস্ট পাঠিয়েছি স্যার, একটু
মাইক্রোফোন বন্ধ, মাইক্রোফোন বন্ধ, নেটেও বোধহয়
সমস্যা। স্যার রাজীব স্যার তাহলে কি করবেন স্যার?
আনমিউট করেন, আনমিউট করেন। চঞ্চলের মাইক্রোফোন বন্ধ।
এখন শোনা যাচ্ছে স্যার, শোনা যাচ্ছে।
Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan, for your excellent presentation, and you have covered all the areas of peptic ulcer disease, H. pylori related peptic ulcer disease, like clinical management, endoscopic management, and the surgical management. I think it was very good, but I'd like to mention one thing. Though the different aspects of clinical improvement and the regimen, one thing is important. The prevalence is important very much for the hygienic condition. Related to hygienic condition of the country. In 2017, I went to South Korea for training. They told that 20 years back, we are in the same condition like you, like 80% of our population was H. pylori positive. But in 2017, they told that only 20% are H. pylori positive due to the improvement of the hygienic condition. So improvement of the hygienic condition of the nation, of the country, is very important in association with the clinical improvement. Another important thing I like to mention that though 90% of the population of our country is H. pylori positive, only 10 to 15% are have pathology. So in some clinicians advised anti-H. pylori, that is H. pylori antibody, it is not acceptable and it is not beneficial in relation to treatment. And now the floor is open for question and answer session. We have two panel of experts and the two learned speaker or chairpersons. If you have any query relating to both topics, clinical audit and H. pylori related peptic ulcer disease, you can ask the questions and our speaker and the panel of experts will answer your questions. Thank you. Any questions from the floor?
স্যার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল স্যার।
Yes, you can ask.
স্যার আমি ডক্টর শিশির ফেস বি রেসিডেন্ট স্যার। আমার আলী হাসান ওর টপিকের প্রতি একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল স্যার। স্যার একটা কোশ্চেন ছিল যে একটা ছিল স্যার যে প্রেজেন্টেশনে বলা হয়েছে যে স্যার যদি H. pylori টেস্ট করতে চাই তাহলে মিনিমাম 4 উইকস আমরা পিপিআইটা বন্ধ রাখবো। আসলে এটা কারণটা কি? আলী হাসানের প্রতি আমার ইয়েটা ছিল যে পিপিআইটা আমরা কেন 4 সপ্তাহ বন্ধ রাখবো?
পিপিআই এর একটা অ্যান্টি H. pylori ইফেক্ট আছে। পিপিআই যদি ইউজ করি তাহলে এটার নেগেটিভ আসবে, ফলস নেগেটিভ আসবে। আমরা H. pylori পিপিআই এর ডোজ এন্ড ডিউরেশন দুইটাই যদি ডোজ যদি বাড়াই তাহলে দেখা যায় যে H. pylori এর উপরে এটা একটা নেগেটিভ ইফেক্ট। সো এটার জন্যই আমরা আসলে এটা বন্ধ রাখবো। কিন্তু কি মেকানিজম কোন মেকানিজমে এই এইচ পাইলোরির উপরে এটা ইফেক্ট করে সেটা বলা নাই, কিন্তু এটা অ্যান্টি এইচ পাইলোরি ইফেক্ট আছে।
Any other question?
Hasan, thank you for your nice presentation. আমি ডাক্তার অভিজিৎ। আমার দুইটা প্রশ্ন ছিল। প্রথম প্রশ্ন যে আপনি বলছেন যে এইচ পাইলোরি ইরাডিকেশন থেরাপি দেওয়ার পরও পিপিআই আমরা কন্টিনিউ করে যাব।
না, এইচ পাইলোরি ইরাডিকেশন কন্টিনিউ হচ্ছে কয়েকটা ইন্ডিকেশন আছে। যদি এইচ পাইলোরি অ্যাসোসিয়েটেড আলসার হয় সেক্ষেত্রে মেইনটেনেন্স সাকসেসফুল ইরাডিকেশনের পরে কন্টিনিউ করার দরকার নাই, কিন্তু যদি ফেইলার টু ইরাডিকেট হয় সেই সকল ক্ষেত্রে কন্টিনিউ করতে হবে, অথবা যদি কমপ্লিকেটেড পেপটিক আলসার ডিজিজ নিয়ে আসে সেই সকল ক্ষেত্রে মেইনটেনেন্স থেরাপিটা দিতে হবে।
আচ্ছা, সেটা কি গ্যাস্ট্রিক আলসার বা ডিওডিনাল আলসার সব ক্ষেত্রে প্রযোজ্য?
এখানে যেটা আছে যে ডিউরেনাল যদি কমপ্লিকেটেড হয় দুটার ক্ষেত্রেই প্রযোজ্য একটা ডিউরেশন পর্যন্ত, যেমন লাইক ডিউরেনাল আলসার আমরা 6 to 8 weeks, and for gastric ulcer 8 to 12 weeks, as gastric ulcer heals slowly, and আর uncomplicated আলসারের ক্ষেত্রে দরকার নাই।
মানে 6 to 8 উইকস আমরা কন্টিনিউ করে যাব এর পরেও?
Complicated ulcer হয়, if complicated ulcer and also some indication I have seen the failure to eradicate or continuous NSAID use or giant ulcer with multiple comorbidity old age in that case.
আচ্ছা, আর একটা প্রশ্ন ছিল যে বাংলাদেশের একটা স্টাডিতে বলা হয়েছে যে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন রেজিস্ট্যান্স রেট ক্লারিথ্রোমাইসিনের চেয়ে বেশি।
হ্যাঁ,
কিন্তু আমরা এখানে ওয়ার্ডে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন অনেক জায়গায় দেখা যাচ্ছে যে আমাদের অনেক মানে অনেক কিছুতে প্রেসক্রিপশনে দেখা যায় যে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিনটা ইউজ করা হচ্ছে, যে আমরা বলি যে ক্লারিথ্রোমাইসিনের চেয়ে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিনের সেনসিটিভিটি বেশি। তাহলে তো স্টাডির সাথে আসলে আমাদের ডেইলি প্র্যাকটিসটা কন্ট্রাডিক্টরি হয়ে গেল।
আচ্ছা, আমি লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেসড ট্রিপল থেরাপি নিয়ে আমাদের দেশের কোনো স্টাডি আমি পাইনি যে সাকসেস রেট কত। এখানে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন একটা স্টাডিতে দেখানো হয়েছে যে 66% রেজিস্ট্যান্ট, এন্ড এইটা আমরা ইউজ করি, কিন্তু এটা যে সাকসেস রেট কত সেটা আসলে ডকুমেন্টেড না। এখন এটা দিয়ে স্টাডি করা যায় যে এটা সাকসেস রেট কত, অথবা অল্টারনেটিভ যেমন জাপানি সোসাইটি অফ গ্যাস্ট্রোএন্টারোলজিতে ওদের এখানে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন রেজিস্ট্যান্স রেট হাই, এজন্য ওরা লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন ইউজ না করে ওদের গাইডলাইনে ওরা মক্সিফ্লক্সাসিন ইউজ করে and as second line therapy after failure of the clarithromycin based triple therapy. So আমাদের এখানে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন রিলেটেড সাকসেস রেট ইরাডিকেশন রেটের কোনো স্টাডি আমি পাইনি। এখন এই জন্য এটা নিয়ে আমি কমেন্ট করতে পারছি না।
ডক্টর হাসান,
আচ্ছা, আরেকটা কথা যে যদি ক্লারিথ্রোমাইসিন আমরা ব্যবহার করতে না পারি, কারণ 15% এর বেশি হলে আমরা বলছি দেখানো হচ্ছে যে ক্লারিথ্রোমাইসিন ইউজ করব না, তাহলে আমরা ক্লারিথ্রোমাইসিন ইউজ করতে পারলাম না, লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন ইউজ করতে যদি না পারি, তাহলে অ্যাকচুয়ালি মানে আমাদের দেশের জন্য রিকমেন্ডেশন আমরা কি ইউজ করব?
আচ্ছা, আমাদের
একটু ইন্টারাপ্ট করি স্যার, চঞ্চল স্যার মনে হয় কিছু বলতে চাচ্ছে স্যার।
হ্যাঁ জি, আমি বলছি যে আমাদের দেশে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেসড স্টাডি আছে, ডক্টর শশাঙ্ক কুমার সাহা, উনার লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেসড স্টাডিতে উনি সাকসেস রেট মোর দ্যান ক্লারিথ্রোমাইসিন উনি কম্পারেটিভ স্টাডি করেছিলেন, ওটা দেখিয়েছেন, এবং সম্ভবত ডক্টর এরশাদ উদ্দিন উনিও করেছিলেন। সুতরাং দুইটা স্টাডি আছে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেসড স্টাডি যেগুলোতে সাকসেস রেট more than clarithromycin based study. So in our country, in our perspective, levofloxacin is better, we think.
Yeah, হাসান,
আমার একটা কথা হচ্ছে স্যার, জি বলেন স্যার।
হাসান, ওই আমার থিসিস ছিল এরশাদ ভাই আর আমার একসাথে, একটা ওই যে সাইফুদ্দিন স্যার জানেন, স্যারই করাইছিলেন। একটা হচ্ছে যে তোমার স্টুল অ্যান্টিজেন টেস্ট দিয়ে একটা অংশ, আর একটা অংশ লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেসড ট্রিপল থেরাপি দিয়ে। লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেসড ট্রিপল থেরাপিটা এরশাদ ভাই থিসিসের অংশ ছিল। ওখানে অ্যাপ্রক্সিমেটলি মানে 78% বা এরকম ছিল, আর মোটামুটি ভালো ছিল। আর এরপরেও আরো কয়েকটা শশাঙ্ক দ্বার আছে, আরো দুই একটা আছে, যা কালচার সেনসিটিভিটি আছে, শাহিনের আছে, তাই না মাসুদ ভাই? শাহিনের আছে, কালচার সেনসিটিভিটি আছে, শাহিনের
আছে একটা।
এগুলো হয়তো জার্নালে আছে না, ওয়েবসাইটে পাওয়া যাচ্ছে না, কিন্তু স্টাডিগুলো আছে।
এগুলো স্যার পাবলিশড আর্টিকেল হিসেবে ওয়েবসাইটে আমি খুঁজছিলাম স্যার, পাই নাই। একটা আর্টিকেল পেয়েছিলাম স্যার, রায়হান স্যার ছিল, যেটা আমি শো করেছি, ওনারা যেটা করেছিল স্যার ওই যে অ্যামোক্সিসিলিন, মেট্রোনিডাজল এন্ড পিপিআই ফর 14 ডেজ ইউজ করেছিল, এবং যাদের মেট্রোনিডাজল সেন্সিটিভিটি ছিল এরা স্যার 89% সেন্সিটিভিটি ছিল স্যার। এই রেজিমেন্টটাই স্যার জাপানি সোসাইটি অফ গ্যাস্ট্রোএন্টারোলজির গাইডলাইনেও একই সেম রেজিমেন্ট আছে, যে অ্যামোক্সিসিলিন, মেট্রোনিডাজল এবং পিপিআই ওরাও এটা সেকেন্ড লাইন ট্রিটমেন্ট হিসেবে ইউজ করে। আর স্যার আমাদের স্যার যেহেতু ক্লাইথ্রোমাইসিন রেজিস্ট্যান্স রেট হাই, সো ক্লাইথ্রোমাইসিন বেসড ট্রিপল থেরাপি ইজ নট রিকমেন্ডেড। সো আমাদের স্যার অল্টারনেটিভ অপশন আছে স্যার বিসমাথ বেসড কোয়াড্রিপল থেরাপি এন্ড বিসমাথ বেসড, এখানে স্যার গাইডলাইনে দুইটাই ফার্স্ট লাইন হিসেবে ইউজ করা যায়, বিসমাথ বেসড কোয়াড্রিপল থেরাপি or fluoroquinolone containing triple therapy or quadruple therapy as first line treatment. But after failure of the first line treatment and after failure of the bismuth containing therapy, we can go to fluoroquinolone containing triple therapy, or after failure of the fluoroquinolone containing triple therapy, we can go to bismuth containing triple therapy. And other options in new guideline said that the high dose dual therapy, that only PPI and amoxicillin are used, and amoxicillin resistance is very low in our country. So high dose dual therapy is an option. And also we have another option like rifabutin containing triple therapy. So this can be used in subsequently for our population.
Is there any study in our country related to rifabutin?
No sir, rifabutin containing কোনো স্টাডি আমি পাই নাই স্যার, আমাদের দেশে পাইনি।
Hassan, what about sequential therapy?
সিকোয়েন্সিয়াল থেরাপি স্যার এটা নন বিসমাথ কোয়াড্রিপল থেরাপি হিসেবে আসছে স্যার, কিন্তু স্যার এগুলাতে বলা হচ্ছে যে স্যার বিসমাথ কোয়াড্রিপল থেরাপি ইজ মোর রিকমেন্ডেড and concomitant therapy is superior. Sir, concomitant therapy, sequential therapy, these are similar efficacy sir. So in overall sir, they are not superior to the bismuth containing triple therapy. So highlight করা হয়নি স্যার, নতুন করে এটাকে স্যার প্রথম দিকে দেওয়ার ব্যাপারে হাইলাইট করা হয়নি স্যার।
আমি একটু যোগ করি, এইচ পাইলোরির ম্যানেজমেন্ট ধরেন 96 এর দিকে আরম্ভ হয়েছে আমাদের ডিপার্টমেন্টে। 94 এর ডিসকভারি হওয়ার পরে 96 এ এইচ পাইলোরির বিভিন্ন রেজিম নিয়ে আরম্ভ হলো। ইনিশিয়ালি যেটা করা হলো যে তখন উদ্দেশ্য ছিল যে পিপিআই তো থাকবে, পিপিআই এর সাথে দুটো অ্যান্টিবায়োটিক থাকবে, একটা হলো ব্যাকটেরিসাইডাল, একটা হলো ব্যাকটেরিওস্ট্যাটিক। তখন অ্যামোক্সিসিলিন এবং মেট্রোনিডাজল এবং ক্লারিডোমাইসিন বিভিন্ন ধরনের বিসমাথ নিয়ে আসছে এবং প্রত্যেকটাতেই ট্রায়াল হয়েছে। এবং তখন আপনার 96, 97, 98, 98 পর্যন্ত আমাদের মনে হয় মোর অর লেস 25 to 30 ট্রায়াল অফ ইরাডিকেশন থেরাপি হয়েছে। বঙ্গবন্ধুতে হয়েছে, ঢাকা মেডিকেলে হয়েছে, সিএমএইচে হয়েছে, বিভিন্ন জায়গায় হয়েছে। কিন্তু আমাদের রেজাল্ট কি? আমাদের রেজাল্ট হলো যে আমাদের রেজাল্ট কোনোটাই 60% উপর যায় নাই। ইরাডিকেশন রেট নট মোর দ্যান 60%। আমরা তখন ভাবলাম যে এটা শুধু কেন আমাদের দেশের ক্ষেত্রে, আমরা ইন্ডিয়ার যখন দেখতে গেলাম, পাবলিশ লিটারেচার দেখতে গেলাম, তাদেরও নট মোর দ্যান 60%, ইভেন মিশরও না, পাকিস্তানও না। তখন আমাদের মাথায় চিন্তা আসলো যে এই ইরাডিকেশন থেরাপি ইজ নট অ্যাপ্লিকেবল টু ইন আওয়ার কান্ট্রি অর ট্রপিক্যাল কান্ট্রি লাইক বাংলাদেশ, পাকিস্তান, ইন্ডিয়া, আফগানিস্তান। কারণ ইরাডিকেশন থেরাপির মেন কথা হলো মানে গোল্ড স্ট্যান্ডার্ড অফ ইরাডিকেশন যদি মোর দেন 85% ইরাডিকেশন না হয়, তাহলে পারে সেই ইরাডিকেশনের উদ্দেশ্য সফল হবে না। ফলে হচ্ছে কি অ্যান্টিবায়োটিক অ্যাবিউজ এবং অ্যান্টিবায়োটিক ডিসপ্রপোর্শনেট ইউজ হচ্ছে। এরপরে আমাদের যে গ্যাস্ট্রোএন্টারোলজি সোসাইটির যে মানে কনসেপশন ছিল যে আমরা ইরাডিকেশন থেরাপিতে যাব না। আমরা কিছু কাজ করতাম, পরের দিকে আসলো যে আপনার সিকোয়েন্সিয়াল থেরাপি, সেল বেস থেরাপি, লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেস থেরাপি, এগুলো আসলো, কিন্তু এগুলোর রেজাল্ট নট মোর দ্যান 80%। আমি মনে করি যে এইচ পাইলোরির যে এখন বাংলাদেশের যে অবস্থা, তাতে বাংলাদেশে নট মোর দ্যান 80% ইরাডিকেশন রেট, আদার দেন আমাদের যে হাইজিনিক কন্ডিশন, এটা এইচ পাইলোরি সবারই আছে। ফলে এখন ইরাডিকেট করে অ্যান্টিবায়োটিক খাইয়ে আমাদের মনে হয় খুব একটা লাভ হচ্ছে না। পরে আপনি দেখেন আমরা যারা সিনিয়র আছি, আপনার ধরেন যে আমাদেরও যারা সিনিয়র আছে, তারা মোস্ট অফ দ্য খুব কম মানে কমপ্লিকেটেড কেসেস ছাড়া তারা অ্যান্টি এইচপি থেরাপি লেখে না। এবং অ্যান্টি-এইচপি থেরাপি লিখতে গেলেও আমরা কয়েকটা জিনিস চিন্তা করি যে কোন অ্যান্টিবায়োটিকগুলো আমাদের দেশে রেজিস্ট্যান্স বেশি। যেমন ধরেন যে ক্ল্যারিথোমাইসিন ইজ এ ভেরি গুড ড্রাগ, ভেরি potent bactericidal drug, but rate of resistance development is very much high in case of clarithromycin. যার জন্য দেখেন ক্ল্যারিথোমাইসিন যেমন ইফিকাসি বেশি, তেমন রেজিস্ট্যান্স বেশি, তেমন তার ব্যবহারও কিন্তু এখন এইচ পাইলোরি ইরাডিকেশনের ক্ষেত্রে লিমিটেড হয়েছে। বরং করতেছে গিয়ে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন, কুইনোলোন, কিন্তু ওর মানে রেজিস্ট্যান্স এটা জার্নালে বেশি আসছে, এটা ঠিক আছে, কিন্তু ইফিকাসিতে দেখা যায় কিছু কিছু বেশি পাওয়া যায়। যার জন্য হয়তো যে প্রশ্নটা একজন করলেন যে আমরা ইসে পাচ্ছি, গাইডলাইনে পাচ্ছি যে লিভোফ্লক্সাসিনের রেজিস্ট্যান্স রেট বেশি, কিন্তু আমাদের সিনিয়ররা ব্যবহার করতেছে। ওনারা ব্যবহার করে ওনাদের ওই যে পার্সোনাল এক্সপেরিয়েন্স, এটা যে কোনো জিনিসের একটা লেভেল অফ এক্সপেরিয়েন্স আছে, যে ধরেন যে সিনিয়র অথরিটি যখন হয় তখন তার যে একটা এক্সপেরিয়েন্স আছে, সেই এক্সপেরিয়েন্সে বেসড করে ওনারা লিভোফ্লক্সাসিন বেস কিছু ট্রিপল থেরাপি দেয়, কিন্তু কমপ্লিকেটেড কেসে, নট ইন আনকমপ্লিকেটেড পেপটিক আলসার ডিজিজ। আমি মনে করি এই আলোচনাটা খুব ভালো হয়েছে এবং এইটা আপনাদের মানে রিক্যাপিচুলেশন অফ দ্য স্টুডেন্টস অ্যান্ড আমার যারা কলিগ আছে তাদের জন্য এটা খুব ফ্রুটফুল হবে। আমি মনে করি চঞ্চল এখন আপনি অন্যদিকে আগাতে পারেন।
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you to the audience. The question and answer session was very interactive and a very good one. Now now the time for vote of thanks. I like to invite Mr. Mujibur Rahman, Manager Sales, Esquire Pharmaceuticals, to vote of thanks, to give vote of thanks, and I like to give my gratitude and thanks to the Esquire Pharmaceuticals for arranging such a good
Thank you very much, sir. Am I audible, Dr. Ubaid Adnan?
Yes, you are audible.
Thank you very much, Honorable Chairperson and most respected panel expert and learned speakers and most respected dear participant. Assalamu alaikum and very good afternoon. This is Mujibur Rahman, Business Manager of Esquire Pharmaceuticals Limited. Like to welcome all of you. It's my great pleasure to have been asked to pay vote of thanks in this very wonderful webinar with the Gastroenterology Department of Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University of Dhaka. Really, it's imaging for all of us, as because Bangabandhu Sheikh Mujib Medical University, one of the renowned medical university all over the world. Of course, I beg to pay my heartiest gratitude to those doctors, those we lost them in this pandemic situation of 2020. Respected doctors, it's no doubt, it's our great pleasure to have been with you on behalf of Esquire Pharmaceuticals Limited. First of all, I beg to convey my heartiest thanks to our two speakers, especially Professor Dr. Mohammad Rajibul Alam and Dr. S.M. Ali Hassan for their elaborate presentation. I think they have completed the whole area so that questionnaire session is also very much participative and very useful. I think their expectation is desirable. We see present Dr. Ali Hassan and Dr. Mohammad Rajibul Alam. Respected doctors, we know Esquire is the largest pharmaceuticals company with the help of all of you, as because Esquire is the now pride of the nation. Is the number one pharmaceuticals company since 34 years. Now is becoming a multinational company with the cooperation of all of you. Respected doctors, we'll be happy to know. Now we are going to be production in our product in Nairobi, Kenya. This is the pride of all of you. It's happened due to all of your cooperation. It's quietly impossible without your cooperation in this country. So I like to convey my heartiest thanks again to moderator, Professor Dr. Chanchal Kumar Ghosh for his excellent anchoring in the whole of the program. Of course, a big thanks to our Professor Dr. Mohammad Anwar Kabir sir for his smart elaborating the session and smartly concluding the session. As per his experience, he addressed many things about the H. pylori and its management. Respected doctors, all of you know, we have the triple therapy to management of the H. pylori. After the long conversation, we have to know that one need H. pylori and what to do to use the H. pylori. Thanks again, Dr. Ali Hassan, sir, for his excellent presentation with reference why we should to avoid some drugs during the start the H. pylori. Again, I like to convey my heartiest thanks, Professor Dr. Mohammad Anwar Kabir, but we are very much sorry to fail to get Professor Dr. Mohammad Abdul Rahim sir in this session. We are very much sorry for this. I hope and pray we are always with you. Finally, we like to request all of you to take yourself to treat the nation, as because all of physicians are asset for the nation. Thank you very much, and thanks again for giving the chance. Thank you, Dr. Vedardhan, and Dr. Again, thanks, Dr. Professor Chanchal Kumar Ghosh, for allowing me.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mujibur Rahman, Manager Sales, Square Pharma. Thank you for support. We hope that the webinar was very good. The presentation was very good. The question and answer was very good. Now the time of conclusion, and I like to request our today's chairperson, sir, Professor Anwar Kabir sir, to conclude the session. And thank you so much.
Thank you, Chanchal, for your nice anchoring. Thank you, panel of experts. Thank you, Square Pharmaceutical, for good sponsoring. Today's webinar is very important because two topics are presented. One topic is presented by Dr. Rajibul Alam, medical audit. That is less read, less discussed, most important. And I hope what he present in his slide, that medical audit is very essential. He gave an example of endoscopy report before audit and after audit. And I always try to say you should document it. You should document it with scientific methods. If you don't document it, you cannot correct yourself and you cannot get medical audit and you cannot improve yourself. I think this topic will be another in webinar. It will be more discussed, and it is a very less described issues described by the Professor Rajibul Alam. I give him a great thanks. And next topic is the management of H. pylori. It is highly discussed, highly known, but it is a recapitulation that is presented by the Dr. Ali Hassan. I again give him thanks. And I thanks the Saifuddin Ahmed, Masudur Rahman Khan, Asad, Shoaib Chaudhry, Jahid Rahman, all are who are present in this webinar. Thank you, Square Pharmaceuticals. Thank you all.
Thank you. Now we are at the end of the session, and again we will meet in our next condolence meeting of the condolence of the our great teacher, Chairman Sir Professor Abdul Rahman's wife in memory. Thank you all.
Thank you, sir. Sir, with your permission, now I can stop today's webinar.
Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.